Hello, everyone. I'm a mess today. Sorry. Um, I, I'm just a mess. It happens. We'll all live. Um, Good to see everyone here on night 20. We are up into the twos of the Orphan's Tales live reading series. Back in the dark, where we belong, hiding what a mess I am today. Yes, all hail the Supreme Leader. So apparently I've started a cult on Twitter. Who knew? I don't know what's going on. Some insane woman on Twitter who's angry that I referred to prayer as magic says that I'm trying to start a Twitter cult. So we've all decided that sparkly hats and hot dishes are de rigueur for the cult. We're working out our commandments. We'll get there sooner or later. So yeah, hi everyone. It's a very exciting night. We're going to be finishing up the Book of the Steppe tonight, moving on to the Book of the Sea tomorrow night. Once again, we are listening to S.J. Tucker as we do our beginning, our housekeeping in the beginning. Yes, you are all individuals. It's been a sort of quiet day around here, working on the new book, and I made a very good dinner, so I'm full of food, as a good cult leader always should be. So let's do our housekeeping as usual. This is not an audiobook of The Orphan's Tales. This is a play, a one-woman show. You can find the singer of the lovely music that we are listening to at sjtucker.com and both albums that she has written based on this book. You can follow me on Patreon at Kat Valenti. You can subscribe to my Patreon and follow me on Twitter, both at Kat Valenti. Is usually my name in various places. You can catch up with the archive if you've missed any nights on my YouTube channel, which is Kat Valenti Live, because apparently there's another Kat Valenti out there. Weird. Gross, not acceptable, but I had to stick something else on there. You can also put a tip in the tip jar on my Instagram profile if you like, or on my website at katherinemvalenti.com. I understand that times are super tight for all of us, so if you can't give anything, that's totally fine. Please just enjoy these readings. But if you are so moved, everything sucks for artists right now, and it would be deeply, deeply appreciated. And anybody who does toss a coin to their witch, I will thank you on the next stream. And I think that's it. Oh, and I take questions at the end. I always forget this part. I take questions at the end, but things tend to go fairly quickly, and it's weird to have dead air while I wait for people to think of questions. So think of them while I'm reading, and then we can get right into it at the end. And you know that from last time that the more questions you ask, the more I tend to ramble on about random crap forever. Yes, live from the Briary. It's Sunday night. The quietest of all nights. I have to do the trash after this. Don't forget, Kat. All right. Well, let's get started with this. So just to remind you, we're in the middle of the King's Tale, and he is super grossed out by the presence of a centaur on the throne. He's not the king yet, if you missed last night. Doesn't like the kingdom being ruled by an animal. So the centaur king is telling his story, which is called The Tale of the Eight-Chambered Heart. Before my grandfather went out to pasture, it was decided by those much wiser than I that the 8 kingdoms, as varied in their folk as a field of 10,000 blades of grass, could not be governed by men and women. They were fit for country gentry, certainly, counting things up and doling things out. But how could they be trusted to speak and act for us, the second nation, the nation of monsters? Obviously they could not. Centaurs seemed a likely choice, standing as we do between the bed and the stable, between men and beasts, between the wild and the world. It was thought providential that our massive hearts necessary to serve such massive bodies had 8 chambers, one for each kingdom. And so it was that for many lifetimes centaurs ruled, some badly as untrained stallions, some well as sweet-natured geldings. That is the way with rulers. We were never immune. But watching the kings of men before us, we learned that passing the crown to sons and daughters was as foolish as feeding seaweed to a wolf. We decided our rulers in a way much more suited to our strengths, with a race. The morning was... didn't even remember that I did that in Fairyland too. The morning was crisp and apple-strewn in the autumn that I took my place at the starting line. My rival was Dapple, a tall, handsome grey whose chest was so broad I could not have put my arms around it if they could stretch to twice their usual length. I was a little worried, fast as I was. I was not the strongest of my herd, and my chest looked sickly next to this muscled block of breath and bone. "It is a perfect day for a race," Dapple boomed approvingly, pawing the earth with pearl-bright hooves. "I hope you mean to make a real contest of it. I should not like to be queen just because you'd caught a sniffle." She beamed at me, a winning smile framed by heaps of silver hair. Despite our position, I liked her. She smelled good, like birch leaves and alfalfa and quick-running streams. The rules were these. Those who had a wish to rule would present themselves at the starting line, and few enough did this, as centaurs are reticent folk, who generally keep to themselves and scoff at the trappings of power, another reason we were deemed suitable for it, and each of them fastened to a plough. Another plough would be set beside them, and whatever local magician or soothsayer had been chosen for it would enchant the blade to draw itself. The horse who could beat the undrawn plough and the competing beast would take the crown. Those who could best furrow the earth and make it flourish were those who should help its people to flourish as well. There were only 2 of us in the autumn morning when I stood beside Dapple and tried my legs at a rein. Each time a race was held, fewer of us turned up at the starting line. In the end, centaurs prefer the pasture and play and mounting and rolling in the grass. But I was not reticent, nor did I scoff at power. I was not the wisest horse ever to whistle through the wind, but I was hungry. In those days, I was so hungry. Crowns seemed to sing and whisper and wheedle from its height, slung onto the branch of a tree at the far end of the field. It shone and sparkled, and sighed that it wished only to rest on my head. I liked it, too. It smelled only of itself, and that was good enough for me. My thoughts were interrupted as the crowd began to murmur and stamp its hooves in confusion. The trials wizard had come into our field with his plough sparkling like a young colt's eyes in the sun, long red robes flashing and flapping in the brisk morning. He had no collar. He was ageless and high-nosed, clearly schooled with chairs and pencils, well-clothed and well-shod. But there was no collar. We did not know how to look at him, how to address him, how he fit with us. He took all of our glances in his stride, and set to rubbing his gleaming plough with powders and oils, murmuring to it like a favorite dog, brushing it with his long, thick-knuckled fingers. When he finished, it did not gleam, but dripped and clouded with baleful colors, ochre and oxblood and onyx. He invited me from my starting position to check his work, as if it were a particularly complex arithmetic problem. I trotted over, meaning to sniff as quickly as I could at the noxious fluids and declare it well done. I was still a simple horse. What did I know about magic, besides how bad it smelled? But once I bent over the plough, swishing my tail at flies and scratching at the back of my head in what I imagined was a very knowledgeable manner, he turned his pinched face and dark eyes up to me through the share and the shin, and whispered so quietly I thought it was a bee buzzing in my ear, so quietly that he could be sure no one heard but me. "I can give you what you want." "What?" I said too loudly. Dapple looked over at me through a crowd of impertinent young colts who were trying to measure her height and breadth. Her bared chest was smooth and puffed as she pranced, her proud breast sheened in gray. She snorted and raised a silvery eyebrow. I coughed theatrically and grinned at her through my sniffle. She laughed, and her laugh was as big and broad as her chest, a laugh fit to bust barrels. "I can give you what you want. This race, the crown," came the voice again, softer than flies in a yearling's tail. "You're fast enough to beat the plough, that's certain as a rain in winter. But you'll never beat her. Look at those shoulders, like spotted boulders they are. She's a better horse than you, a better runner. She'll probably make a better monarch. But she won't give me what I want. I can see that in her withers, her hooves, the fall of her hair, the set of her jaw. She's one of the ones who think virtue can sit easily on a throne. But you You know how the world really rides, I can tell. What is it you want? This time I was soft as mice in the brush, staring studiously at the workmanship of the plough. Why, you, my dear Sorrel. Excuse me. You are precious among creatures, you must know that. He pretended to tighten the joints and brushed a sweaty lock of hair from his face. I wasn't particularly aware, no, I answered. You are halfway between man and animal, and that makes you ideally suited to my interests. Let me pursue my art in peace and without interference. Assist me in the smallest ways from time to time, and I will win this race for you. I thought as quickly as a rabbit with a fox after him. You have no collar. He clenched his jaw. No, I was freed from it by good fortune. I reveled in its lack. Slavery is a sin. I thought, as quickly as I am able. It was a good bargain, but if I knew anything, I knew it would end up being more than he claimed. I wiped the sweat from my hands on my coat. If I am king, and I have a wizard in my employ, it would only be correct that he be bound to me, that he be my doulios. Otherwise, how am I to trust him? What is to keep him from cutting me to pieces on the smallest whim? Virtue does not sit easily on the throne, you say. Well, sin may have a comfortable rest there. The wizard grimaced, and I could see his teeth grind beneath leather-thick skin. He looked up to the sky imploringly and down at his hands, which opened and closed as though his palms were pricked by the tip of a brand. For a moment I thought the man would actually weep, but he did not. His shoulders shuddered under his crimson robes, which seemed suddenly less bright and cheerful. He put his fingers almost absent-mindedly to his neck, stroking the pale, clammy skin. Yes, fine, he rasped. I will put on the collar again if you will give yourself to me. It will be worth it to have you. We will give ourselves to each other. I tapped the dirt with my hoof. What will you do to her? It will not be too terrible, will it? In less time than a mayfly takes to flap its wings, the sorrow was gone from his eyes, replaced by an uncut stallion's ravenous glee. Not too terrible, no. I will burst her heart in your chest, one chamber at a time. I looked at Dapple, how beautiful she was in the autumn light, savoring a lump of sugar in her ruddy mouth. Her long hair sparkled like a fall of spring rain, and her belly was furrowed in the softest white. I did like her so. But the crown shone ahead of her, and it sang, how it sang. No, I swallowed dryly, hardly able to speak. Not too terrible. Dapple nosed me playfully when I returned to the garlanded starting position. I promise, she said teasingly, with her smooth, race-naked skin shining like armor. I'll let you stay on as my consort. I'm sweeter than apples and sugar and acorns after rain. I promise that, too. I managed a good impression of the grin that such bravado requires and slapped her rump as comrades will. My fingers were smeared with the foul-smelling grey unguent the wizard had given to me. It would not show against her skin, he said, and no one would be wiser. She blushed with pleasure, and a blush beneath silver skin is something to see. The bone horns blared, and we were off, running faster than any rider and horse, and the driverless plough bouncing alongside us, drawing long, even furrows in the rich soil, its dusts and oils falling off in orange clumps as it went. For a few seconds, I thought I might win on my own. I'm very fast, fastest of all my chestnut-hided family, and sometimes the slender horse will beat the behemoth. My legs clattered quick on the pebbles, but Dapple was only holding back. She spurred ahead with a laugh that shook the elms and firs alike and slapped my rump with friendly delight as she passed me by completely. My own heart surged in my chest as if sympathetic to hers. Would he keep his word? She was so far ahead I could only keep her gray-white tail in view. And then she stumbled. I felt it in my own chest, a tiny echo of what must have been a cloud-clapping clamor in hers. One by one I felt them go, each chamber collapsing like a hand suddenly clenched into a fist. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Dapple tumbled onto the raceway with a terrible dull sound, and pebbles sprayed up all around her like a wave. I sped ahead. The plow was a full horse length behind me. I did not look at her as I passed her body, already surrounded by the concerned, soon-to-be mourners. I crossed the line. The crown sang so loudly, and with both hands I seized it, and its voice was pure sugar and apples and acorns after rain. When we burned her, as centaurs do their dead, I gave a long and heartfelt eulogy. I was the king. It was my duty to mourn the fallen. The air was filled with the smell of her meat, and I tried not to gag. The wizard Omir came to me after her ashes were combed and looked over the charred bones. You will be the last centaur king. I thought I should mention it. Perhaps if you were not the kind of beast to whom a crown sings, there would be more after you. It never sang to Dapple, after all. But then, if it had, I would not have chosen you, and your sad place as last in a long line is why it had to be you. You will help me, and you will conquer peoples who will help me. And after you, kings will be men again, and I already know what they are made of. When you are not past middle age, a young and hungry man will come to you on an unspeakable errand, and he will put a knife through the 8 chambers of your heart, and he will be king after you. Slowly, fat drops of rain began to fall from the sky, extinguishing the last of Dapple's embers. "Shall we go in?" said the wizard, with a wide smile on his face. The king's tale continued. The centaur king was lost in himself. I meant to be a good king. I did mean to. But there were revolts to put down, and taxes to collect, and threats to quell on the borders. It just becomes too much to carry on all that on your back along with virtue. Virtue rides heavy in the saddle, you know. He rose from his pile of cushions, and for the first time I saw him whole, saw his left flank, which had been swallowed up in shadow and rose-colored silk. It was a map of scars and missing flesh, the cuts old and new and every age in between, crisscrossing his haunches until there was no hide left, only knotted flesh, and long pieces of him were missing, just gone, scooped from him as cleanly as cream from a bowl. Not one of his ribs had been left unbroken. One hoof was as fragile and as filled with holes as a honeycomb, and the ankle a mass of scabbed-over wounds. He favored it, and his gait had a terrible lope. He hobbled to me and bent his face to mine, lanky brown hair smoothed back from a haggard brow. "Tell me, Ismail, is it? How does virtue ride with your errand in his bags?" "Lighter," I whispered, than with an unnatural creature who lets a slave cut into him until he cannot walk. He looked down as if he had not noticed his ruined side until now. "Oh yes, this is my use. I don't suppose you have this sort of use. You notice he takes flesh only from the horse half of me, or if I am lucky, the place where horse and man meet. I am happy you came, now it's happened. Heirs are heirs after all. I'm sure you two will find some use for each other, and frankly, I am tired of being useful." I glanced at Omir. He met my stare stone to steel, abashed and unashamed. In that moment we understood each other, and all thought of my mother evaporated from my mind like steam rising from a snow-rimmed lake. She could rot in her tower with her thrice-damned hole. I did not need her. I needed him. Omir reached into his dark robes and pulled out a long knife. The 3 of us watched it glint in the light that streamed through the fine-cut windows. He handed it to me. I did not know killing could be like this, in the open, in the light, acquiesced to by all. It was almost like being at a church service, and I was excited as a child at his first altar. The thrill of it sang to me like a crown. I took the knife from him and walked to the centaur king, patting his shoulders like a rider approaching a nervous mount. He did not shy away, but met my stare, heartwood to iron. "Monster," I hissed, and slid the knife into his heart, up to the hilt, drew it back and thrust it in again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorrel smiled and fell onto the dais with the empty thud of heavy bones against marble. The tale of the prince and the goose concluded. Leander stared at his father in his huge empty bed, the gray at his temples, the lines in his face that certainly were not born from laughter. His eyes flickered in the low light. Omir and I did find some use for each other. He did not take off his collar, and I did not have him burnt. He wanted the horse people and their witch. I wanted a wizard to make the rain fall when I pleased, to make the drought come when I pleased, to poison whom I pleased and destroy whom I pleased. We did great things. We conquered his horse people together, who were certainly as unnatural as centaurs. I've never liked magic, but I tolerated his, and that bought him for me. That is a fair bargain, since neither of us are interested in his cutting into me like a side of beef. As fair as the one I struck with this country, which has bent to my order as well as any country may. I did not set out to be beloved and just, only strong. A king can be better than that, the prince insisted. And so we all begin, determined to better our father's performances, knowing we can change the very nature of humanity, to make it better, cleaner. But then daggers strike in the night, and peasants revolt, and all manner of atrocities become as necessary as breakfast. Only princes believe in the greater good. Kings know there is only the rain, and all things may be committed in its holy name. Now, are you going to cut my throat, or would you prefer the more intimate method, strangulation? I may have a garrote in the drawer. No, Leander answered him. I won't kill you like a thief in the night. Again the king laughed, low and friendly, as though he were reading his boy a story by firelight. No, Leander. Thieves are not so bad. Killing wears all possible costumes. There is no death, no murder that is better than any other. If you can kill me, the matter hardly bears consideration. You want to kill your own father. You think it will make you sleep easier for the next 70 years if you can say you did it honorably. But your honor is blackened by patricide, and no amount of high-sounding formalities will make it white again. Are you waiting for a confession, so that your soul will be clean? Very well. Everything she told you is true. And probably a great deal else besides. I have more blood on my hands than you could spill in a lifetime. I wear it proudly. It is my crown and my scepter. Would that you had such purpose, such drive. But you will learn. We all do. With this he folded back the rose-colored bedsheets with a genteel hand. Beneath them he was fully clothed in a beaten leather corselet and breeches, brown from top to bottom, like a chestnut horse. Do you need a weapon? Did you really come so unprepared? A father's work is never done. At least there's no shortage here. He pulled a dagger from under his mattress. Firelight leapt along the blade like a flashing salmon. Leander took it numbly, hardly seeing the hilt slide into his hand. Nothing, he thought. Nothing since he had left the palace that night so long ago had happened the way it was supposed to. He sat close to his father, so close he could smell his dry skin like burned sand. I'm sorry. Ismail of the 8 Kingdoms rolled his eyes and pulled his own dagger from his corselet, holding it to the prince's skin. If you can't manage one paltry death, how can you be king? This is how it's done, my son. Before he could plunge the blade into Leander's throat, Airy, forgotten by the close-caught pair, threw her head back, black hair tumbling to the floor. She screamed again, louder than when she had first emerged, shattering every window and glass bauble, causing the birds to begin to fall from the sky, crow, sparrow, finch. One by one they fell by the window like many-colored rain. The cry was filled with rage that swelled like a flooded river as she watched this father who was not father coming at last near to killing the prince. As his dagger touched the boy's neck, her voice shattered its blade, and one of the shards penetrated deep into the king's royal eye. Leander hesitated only a second, and then plunged his knife into the king's chest with all his strength, collapsing onto the hilt as it struck true and deep. But the laughter of the king did not stop, even as blood bubbled from his mouth. "Remember, my son," he gasped as he perished. "With my death, I instruct you. This is what it means to wield power. In the end, the blade is always in your own hands." Aerie stood in a shimmering white gown on the castle balcony. She stared out into the highlands and the mountains beyond. "All I ever wanted was to leave this place," Leander said, walking up behind her and placing a hand on her shoulder. "To be free. And he caught the last of us after all, locked me into this place forever. I have been set to 0 for all time." "But the nest survives, little brother," she replied, her voice growing more musical every day. He held her close. "At least you are here with me, Aerie. At least there's that." But she untangled herself from him and looked sadly into his tired eyes. "No," she sighed. "I am leaving. I must go. There is a duty on me, just as on you. You have saved your father's kingdom. I must tend to our mothers." Her gaze stole again to the far hills like a line of shadows hunting her. "When I flew, I knew what I was. I knew the wings were borrowed, but it was far away. I do not know why I kept my mind in the bird's body. It is not what the spell was meant to do. But the wind and the moon were all I loved. And then my mother. There was no reason behind it. I simply loved her. Now there is a glut of reasons, and the end point of them all is that there is a cave somewhere in those hills, and I am the only one left to enter it. You were born for power. They'll call you the maimed king who lost his blessing fingers. There will be stories and eventually legends. You cannot escape it, any more than I can escape the memory of the currents of air under my belly. Perhaps you can learn to use it differently. Perhaps you can remain a prince, though you are called king by all who have voices to utter it. Perhaps not. But I cannot stay to be your teacher. I have lost all that I was. I must find it again with the poor lost stars. We must each find our ways to power and how to hold it in our hands. Your nest cannot be mine." Leander struggled with tears he would not let fall on his sister's slender shoulder. "But you will not go for a while, will you?" he said. "I could not bear it. This is such a lonely place. Given time, I could learn to hold power like a coal and not be burned. But you must stay a while yet. For me. We must be a family for a while. Just a little while." Aerie turned to him and smiled dazzlingly like a dozen noontime suns. "Of course I will stay with you, my brother, my own." In the morning, she had disappeared, as though she had never been, and the king stood alone in his great ivory hall. Into the dawn. The dawn had begun to dress herself in blue and gold, adorning her hair with red jewels. She stretched out her hands, and the two children, now almost asleep in the window of the tower. The girl cradled the boy in her lap, her hand stroking his hair as she spoke the last words of her tale. The wind stirred in the garden, and a whirl of white blossoms leapt into the air, swept along in the cool currents and eddies. Wild birds pinwheeled above their heads, singing with such passion they nearly died of the song. The boy looked up at the girl, her face crowned in the new sun, which blazed around her like a corona of liquid gold. Her darkened eyes shone warmly like polished river stones. "That was a wonderful story," he cried, embracing the girl in his excitement. As she slipped down the ivy and crumbling stone, she smiled secretively up into his beaming face, which was washed by the sun's tender hands. "And I shall tell you another, even more strange and wonderful, tomorrow, if you will return to the garden in the night and to me." Laughing, the girl jumped onto the grass and ran away from the tower. She disappeared into the trees, her hair streaming behind her like a promise. And that is the end of the Book of the Steppe. But we're halfway through the Book of the Sea. We will start tomorrow night, which I don't even remember. Let's just find out what the first tale is. It's the Pale Girl's Tale. So we'll find out all about that tomorrow. Someone has a question about the blessing fingers. What is that? What is your question? The awkwardness of waiting for the tippity tap tap typing. Anyone can ask a question now if you have any about the book we've read or anything else. It doesn't matter. We'll give you a few minutes to ask questions if you like. I'll do the outro stuff while we're waiting. So that is the Orphan's Tales. If you would like to buy copies of the Orphan's Tales, I highly recommend ordering it online from your local independent bookseller. They are struggling quite a bit in this time of plague. My local independent bookseller, if you would like to support them, is printbookstore.com. You can find the music based on this book at sjtucker.com, along with a great amount of other amazing music. You can subscribe to my Patreon at Kat Valenti. You can follow me on Twitter at Kat Valenti. There is a tip jar in my Instagram profile and one on my website at katherinemvalenti.com. Anything that you can contribute is more than appreciated. Everything's really tight for us right now. It is quite a lot of work to put these things together every night. But if you can't, then that's totally fine. If you can and you are so moved, I will thank you by name in the next stream. Or not, if you prefer not to be. And I am forever, forever grateful. And so are all of my animals and my child and everything in my house. And you can catch up with the archive at my YouTube channel, Kat Valenti Live. These go up about an hour after I finish recording. It takes quite a while for them to upload. How long did this book take to write? It really depends on how you count. So in the Night Garden, I started in 2002. And I guess I finished the first book in 2004, I think. I wrote The Labyrinth before that, and then I wrote the Book of Dreams sort of in between writing it. So, no, yeah. Oh, okay, I'm getting this wrong. I started in the Night Garden in 2002, and I finished it just before I left Japan, so at the end of 2004. And it was accepted at Bantam Spectra Random House in June of 2005. And then in the Cities of Coin and Spice, I think I started in 2005 and finished beginning of 2006. I think that's about right. Very beginning of 2006. And then it came out, In the Night Garden came out in 2006. So maybe I might have bled into later in 2006. About a year for the second book. And then the second book came out in 2007. So technically, like from start to final publication of the last book, it was 5 years. But I wrote a bunch of other things in the meantime then. It's complicated. But I think it probably took me about 2 years to write the first book and about a year to write the second book. Significance of the two fingers of the left hand, because the witch cut them off in the beginning. They are the blessing fingers, the two pointer fingers. I don't know. I didn't make the rules. The Pope did as to what the blessing fingers are. Yeah. I'm sorry that. There's a lag. I'm sorry. Our internet has been extremely unreliable since everybody got locked in Maine and is trying to access the internet at the same time. So sometimes we have great access, and then sometimes it is a total mess. So I apologize if there's a lag. The blessing fingers are, if you're not familiar with the phrase, these guys right here. Hello. Again, I don't know why. I wasn't there at the meeting. Well, if there's a lag, I'll give it a bit longer. I believe that I started this in the summer of 2002, if I'm remembering all of the order of operations correctly. As I said, it was meant to be originally just a couple little stories to give my niece for her birthday that year, and her birthday is in November, so I would have started it in the summer, and then it, to crib a line from Tolkien, it grew in the telling and became this behemoth thing that I was still working on when I moved to Japan in 2003, and worked on the entire time I was living in Japan, and then finished just before I moved back. So it's a lot of my my 20s are in this book. Yeah, In the Cities of Quinn and Spice came out in 2007, and it was in May of 2007 that In the Night Garden won the Tiptree Award, which was a huge deal for me. I went from being nobody to being somebody pretty quickly, winning that award. Yeah, and I was, I think that by a month, at the time, I haven't kept up with the stats, but at the time, by a month, I was the youngest person to win the award. Yes, I did. That's SJ there, the wonderful musician behind the music. Yeah, I was working on it when we met, I think. Back when I only worked on one book at a time. God, can you imagine? Ancient days. Yeah. So, wow, that's so weird. So, right. So In the Cities of Quinn and Spice came out at the end of 2007, which means it came out only a year before I moved to Maine. That just blows my mind, actually. It feels like those parts of my life are completely separate. But I guess it makes sense. Palimpsest came out like 4 months after we moved here, so weird. Will in the Subtle Knife loses the same fingers. Man, the blessing fingers are where it's at if you're going to be writing fantasy and mythology. Like that's what there. And plus, you can kind of function without them, so it's a good, vivid but not crippling injury. I think Frodo loses just the one ring finger, but losing fingers is where it's at for heroes. That's really strange to think about, how much of my career took place in Maine as opposed to other places, because it feels like a lot more happened in my life before I moved here. But I guess I've lived here for 12 years. It's a long time. Kind of still feels like I just got here, even though it is quite literally the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life. Weird. All right. Well, I will see you guys tomorrow night. Same fairy tale time, same fairy tale channel, at 8:30 p.m. EDT, Eastern Daylight Time. We'll start the Book of the Sea. When you write sequels, do you reread your original books to remind yourself of the wee details? No, I do not, because that's boring. I already did that. I wrote it. No, but I will say that because at the time I had no other books under contract, I went right from finishing In the Night Garden straight into writing In the Cities of Quinn and Spice, barely a day in between. So it was all written in one kind of go. So it all just kind of stuck in my head. It was easy to just access it all the time because I wasn't working on anything else really. And I didn't, that was all that was happening in my head. So went straight from one to the other. So I did not reread it. I am, for those of you who are Prester John fans, I swear, when we all recover a little bit and people have interest in supporting Kickstarters again, we will kickstart the third Prester John book. I am most definitely going to have to read those books again because I don't remember anything. But I have 2 lovely audiobooks by a great audiobook reader named Ralph that I will be listening to instead of reading through them, I think. But no, I don't. And the Fairyland books were the same. I was working on other things, but I really just went straight through that series. The only big gap was when I got carpal tunnel really badly and I couldn't type for several months. That was rough. But I don't know, when a series is really alive and I'm working on it, I don't really need to take stock. Like, it's all just kind of there in my head, the way that, I'm a geek for Star Trek or something. I don't really have to do any real effort to remember details about Next Generation. I don't really have to do any effort to remember details about my own books while I'm in it. Give it a couple of years and I'll remember nothing about it. I could write a Deathless sequel right now without rereading the book. There's some that stick out more than others. I think I could probably do another Fairyland book without rereading. It just depends on how my brain is working or not working that particular day. I love you all too. I will see you guys tomorrow for the commencement of the Book of the Sea and the second half of In the Night Garden. I do very much enjoy our evenings together, and I'll see you again soon. Bye, guys.